The reading this morning is from John 12, verses 1 through 8. Mary anoints Jesus. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, the home of Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. There they gave a dinner for him, and Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those at the table with him. Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of nard, anointed Jesus' feet, and wiped them with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, the one who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief. He kept the common purse and used to steal whatever was put in it. And Jesus said, "Leave her alone. She bought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me."
Let us pray. God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts in this hour be acceptable in your sight, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I knew a woman in Wisconsin whose husband of 63 years had been unable to speak or communicate in any kind of effective way for several years before I had the pleasure of meeting them. I never knew him when he was well, and I don't even remember what health episode had occurred to him to bring him to that state, whether it was a stroke or something else, I'm not sure. But he had spent his life in administration with the public school district and was well loved by the whole community. Before his health episode, he was the kind of person everyone considered one of the most intelligent people in the room at any given time. And so his decline had been very sad for many people. It was long and drawn out, and his wife refused to let him go into assisted living. So she did anything and everything she could to make his experience at home as comfortable and as fulfilling as possible. She was a planner, and she felt that the best way she could love him would be to create as much routine for him as possible in their lives together at home. Routine meant that he would always know what was coming next, at least in her mind. She would explain to him what was going on throughout the day. And if anything was coming that would change up the routine, like a visitor or a doctor's appointment, she would take extra care to explain that situation ahead of time to him. One day she was explaining their daily schedule to me while I was visiting, and she explained the bathing and the eating and the transitioning into and out of bed. And at several points throughout the day, she would say, "And then we would stop and have a hug." There came a time when he could no longer go up the stairs of their home. And the planner that she was, and unable to do all the work herself, as she was also in her late 80s, she called all the help she needed from neighbors and church members and their in-home health aide, and together they prepared a place for him on the first floor of their home. She spent a meticulous amount of time preparing the room for him, with help from others. They vacuumed and they dusted and they washed the windows. They removed the curtains and they washed them and rehung them. They sorted books and removed any that no longer seemed relevant to them. This act of preparation from him was so deeply important to his wife, and she knew that this would be the place where he would finish his earthly life, live his last days, take his last breath. She wanted him to feel comfortable and loved in that place, to return to him all the love that she had received from him and she felt he deserved in return. And when the time came for him to sleep in the hospital bed in that room for the first time, she had set up ways for him to listen to music or to watch baseball. She had prepared a spot for herself to be with him, to hold his hand, to touch his head, to sing to him, to have those hugs. In his final days, she would talk about how she was not sad about his death. Planner that she was, she knew already what scripture would be read for his memorial service, and it was, "In my Father's house there are many rooms, and I am going there to prepare a place for you." Preparation was her love language. It was critical for her that he knew that there was a place for him in their home, in her heart, in God's kingdom. Not just a spot, not just some room for him to be if he needed to be there, but a fully prepared place intended for him and for him alone. Preparation was her way of making sure he knew how deeply loved he was and that he belonged somewhere at the hour of his death and those hours before and after. Not everyone is a person who prepares. We all grieve in different ways. And to be clear, some people don't let us prepare for them, even if we would love to. But this woman, this wife of 63 years, the way she grieved was the same way that Mary and Martha grieved in the gospel passage today, through preparation. This was the form that their extravagant love took for them. Preparation was their love language. The outpouring of their love upon him in the form of a preparatory ointment is perhaps what gave him the courage to head into the next few days. Jesus knew that his procession into Jerusalem would be hard, that each step from Lazarus' home in Bethany to the procession in Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, to the upper room on Thursday, to the cross on Friday would be hard. Because Jesus, while fully divine, the Son of God, was also fully human, full of the same hopes and fears that we all carry. And these women whom he loved were pouring their love out upon him that he might carry it with him in each of those steps forward. Because we can do hard things when we know that we are loved and that we are not alone. The oil would anoint him for burial, not an act we typically do before someone has died, but they did it for him, knowing. But the smell of that ointment would also linger on his body each step of the way. When it came time to make those most difficult steps, he might take a deep breath in and smell the costly perfume and remember how deeply he is loved and that he is not alone. And it might give him the energy to take that next step. And likewise, in her grief, Mary might take that deep breath and smell the ointment in her hair and know that she had loved so deeply that it had transformed her and that it had revolutionized the world. So then there's this part of the gospel message that involves Judas, the naysayer in the background, asking why the ointment would be used in that way. Jesus had worked so hard to pull in the lost, the last, the least, the marginalized, and the oppressed, and has taught the disciples consistently to do the same, to do everything in their power to restore the health and vitality and sense of love and belonging of the poor. And so Judas steps in and is so shocked that Mary would use that costly ointment for Jesus and not use it to raise some money for outreach. And so the writer is sure to add these little editorial gestures just in case we don't know who Judas is. So he writes in parentheses, the one who was about to betray him. And he didn't actually care about the poor, but he kept track of the disciples' cash box so he could steal the money for himself. So we can't interpret the passage in any other way than to know that Mary's use of the ointment was perfectly acceptable, that it was faithful, that it was authentic, and that it was in keeping with God's commandment to love one another. And Jesus says, the poor you will always have with you. And we might at first take pause at that statement and even maybe offense, like, don't worry about them right now, they'll still be here later. But if we step back for a minute and look at the overarching narrative of the gospel, we might remember that before Jesus, we didn't really know what it looked like to have the poor with us. In fact, I'm not sure we always knew who the poor were. And Jesus clarified that definition for us in the Beatitudes, in the Sermon on the Mount. Even though our ancestors and the prophets and the entirety of the Hebrew Bible before Jesus was about God's preferential option for the poor, the lost, the last, the least, the marginalized, and the oppressed, Jesus came and lived among us, and he taught his disciples what it actually looked like to have the poor with us. He showed his disciples example after example of what it looked like to find those on the margins and to bring them in, to touch the leper, to break bread with prostitutes and tax collectors, to heal even on the Sabbath, to listen to the voices of those who have not been heard, to make a place at the table for the brokenhearted and for the empty. Jesus came and lived among us and said, these are the people for whom we prepare a place. And he showed us how. And so as he experiences the love language of Mary and Martha, as they anoint his feet, as they prepare him, Jesus is saying, if you are my disciples, then you will never walk again without the poor by your side. Your decisions in life, your movements in this world, the way you represent me, the way you live out God's love, will always and every single time be with the poor next to you, and no longer on the margins. They will always be with you every step of the way until the end of time. But right now, this woman is grieving. And through intentional grief and preparation for her grief, she is able to build up the energy and the courage she needs to put one step in front of the other after she has lost the one she loves the most in this world. God has prepared a spot here at the communion table for each of us. It is here that we can come one Sunday a month with whatever grief we carry, whatever burdens we carry, whatever fears we are living in. It is here we come for the courage to step out of closets, courage to step towards healing, for nourishment to do the work in the world, no matter who we are or where we are in life's journey. It is to this place, prepared for us, that we come so that we can be renewed and restored and revitalized to put one foot in front of the other, so that we might know that we can do hard things because we are not alone, and we are the recipients of an extravagant and unending love. And so thanks be to God. Amen.